I hear this man yell, "Give it to me, you effing bee!" And behind the benches in the curve of that wall, there is a homeless man shaking a homeless woman on the ground and had her pressed up against the wall. I said in my head, what would a cop say right now? And I said in a loud, deep voice, stand up and step away from the woman now.
You know, if you guys have been listening to the show for a while, you've heard more than one episode where OC Spray got someone out of a bind and prevented them from having to use more force in a personal self-defense encounter. Palm Industries is the OC of choice for active self-protection. We love everything about them. We love the efficacy of their product. We've seen it work. Our actual employees have had to use it in the field against a crazy person, and it worked. They've removed any excuse not to carry OC. This is going to solve far more problems more frequently than a firearm, and I wouldn't leave the house without it. Get one at get-ask.com/POM. Get-ask.com/POM. Alrighty, gang, welcome back to the Active Self-Protection Podcast, the second ever video version of the podcast. I am once again your host, Mike Bolivar, and I remain your favorite former Fed. With us today, a new friend of mine, Roy Moore. Roy is in Colorado Springs, Colorado. He is married with 2 kids, and he reached out to us with a really compelling story, one that involves de-escalation, which we are big fans of here at Active Self-Protection. In fact, Neil and John, who everyone knows from the main and the extra channel, just went to a week-long crisis intervention training up in Yavapai County that was normally LE only. So we'll be hearing more about that probably on the extra channel coming up. So with us today is Roy Moore. Roy, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great, Mike. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. So we can't name where you work. That's fine. Tell us what it is roughly that you do. Give us an idea of what that is.
Oh, sure. I work at a nonprofit on the IT team in a nonprofit.
Very good. Well, that's pretty cut and dried. Okay. Sometimes some of the jobs people have require a lot more explanation, but this one does not, evidently. So talk to us about your growing up, your personal history as far as self-defense goes. Did you grow up in a sort of rugged outdoorsy type family, lots of guns and camping and hiking and fishing, or not so much?
Man, I grew up in a home that had guns. You know, we had the whole Armour kind of glass doored, nice rifle shotgun selection. And it was at a time where home gun safety in kids just wasn't the thing it is today. And I remember playing with those guns as if they were toys. And I probably should have killed myself a dozen times over as a child, unsupervised playing with those guns. And because of that, I was not, when I became a parent with kids, I didn't have any thought about having a gun in my home until about 3 years ago. And then I was like, well, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it right. And so I went through all the training. I bought all the stuff to make it safe and secure, and like there will not be an accident in my home. If it's not on me, it's locked up, that kind of stuff. So growing up, I was around guns a lot, but not in a healthy way. So I had to make some adjustments on that as I became an adult.
Yeah, for us, it was, I've probably mentioned this before. I think we had one gun in our house, and it was on the house I lived in. I split time between my dad and my biological mother, but at my dad's house, there was a bolt action shotgun was the extent of the guns we had in the house. My grandfather's house, however, was a wonderful, magical place full of all the guns that ever were. And he was the one who kind of taught me about gun handling. So, I'm a big fan of, as long as you're competent handling the gun, of telling your kids, if you ever want to see it, you ever want to look at it, work the action, pull the trigger, just say the word, we'll go get it out. I'll make it safe and kind of take the mystery out of it. We've talked about that before, but it always bears repeating. Have you done that with your kids?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I do dry fire in my basement. When I do, they sometimes join me, and before I let them take the gun, I was like, wait, what are the 4 rules? And I make them say the 4 rules, and just walk them through it. Just even the handoffs, like, wait, I hold on to it until they say my gun, then I let go, and then just little things about always be as safe as possible. And so we're very much, I've taken them to the range a couple times, but they're still on the younger side. They're not really into it yet. But as they get older, I'll continue to preach the safety of it.
Absolutely. So leading up to your incident, were you in more of a self-defense mindset? Were you an ASP viewer? Were you taking classes, CCW, anything like that?
No, this was pre self-defense, pre-gun, everything. I've done quite a bit since this activity, or since this event. And but no, at the time I was just I was a bit of a natural sheepdog in the sense, like I did keep my head on a swivel. I was always kind of paying attention to my surroundings and encouraging my wife to take precautions and things like that. But I hadn't. I think this event was a catalyst to escalating to another level. And it's been. I'm so thankful for this event that we're going to talk about today, because it has been such a. It's been a backdrop in my mind. Like something had come up and I would kind of apply it to this situation. It's like, well, what if that variation had been there? What if this had been different? Or what if this had happened? So I think about all the time, not obsessively, but just as a tool to think, okay, how would I handle it if this had happened? And it's just been a source of mental reps for me. As I continue to talk about this nebulous thing that we haven't talked about yet.
Right. No, yeah, we'll get to it. Our audience knows the drill. We're teasing them at this point. We'll get to it sooner or later. So I think that really echoes what almost all of our guests have said, who ended up being self-defense minded. There was a catalyst. There was an incident where something happened and they realized, hey, I wasn't really ready for this, or I wasn't as ready as I could have been, or as I would have liked to have been. And so all's well that ends well. As long as that incident isn't too terrible, I think it can lead to good things. And in this case, in your case, in other cases, people being ready for the next time it happens and having the right mindset. So that's great. So talk to us about the incident at hand. You were out in public, so kind of walk us through where you were, who you were with, and kind of what drew your attention that there was something going on.
Sure. So this was just after we'd moved to Colorado Springs about 4 years ago. My boys were, I guess 5 years ago now. My boys were about 8 and 9 at the time. And we went to a local park that looked really nice on Google Maps, and didn't really do much research into the safe areas of the city. And it turns out it wasn't that great of a park as far as safety goes. But it was a big open space. I could see the boys there riding their bikes, and I was walking with my wife, drinking my thermos of coffee. And we are walking down this once curvy sidewalk, and I hear my wife's in mid-sentence, but over her voice, I hear this man yell, "Give it to me, you effing B," just real loud.
That'll get your attention.
And yeah. And so my wife didn't hear yet, because again, she was in mid-sentence, and it just caught my ear. And we come around a bush or a shrubbery or something. And there's this curved, I don't know what you call them, not a retention wall, maybe a retention wall that had some benches. And then there's maybe a windbreak wall behind the benches. Mm-hmm. And behind the benches, in the curve of that wall, there is a homeless man shaking a homeless woman on the ground and had her pressed up against the wall. And he said again, a second time, "Give it to me, you effing B." And my wife heard it that time, and she goes, "Oh," and she saw it, and then she looked at me, and I said, "Oh, yet." And I said, "Hold this." I gave her my thermos of coffee. And I walked up around the back of the man, kept a good distance from him, mm-hmm. but from about 10 yards away, 15 yards away, I'm not sure really. I said in my head, "What would a cop say right now?" And I said, in a loud, deep voice, "Stand up and step away from the woman now."
That's good. That's very coppish. Yes.
It sounded coppish in my mm-hmm. head, and he didn't the first time. So I said again, slower and louder. And then, and his back was still facing me, and he's a good distance away. But the second time I said it, he stood up fast. He had a jacket on. It was early spring. And he threw off the jacket and he turned around.
Let me stop you right there. So paint a picture for our audience. You said he had her on the ground against a retaining wall. Can you kind of describe that a little more detail for us?
Sure. So she's sitting on the ground with her back against the wall.
Okay.
And he's in front of her. He's either kneeling in front of her or stooped in front of her. And he's got her by the shoulders. And he's mm-hmm. like aggressively shaking her and slamming her against the wall, but not a slam, not a I had to jump in right away slam, more of just like a shake kind of slam.
And then he stands up. Kind of describe the guy for us. Race doesn't matter to me, but as far as like, was he a mm-hmm. big dude? Did he look like he's been around the block? Maybe a parolee or something? Or what is your impression of him when he stands up and you get his attention?
I say he looked well seasoned.
Nice.
He hadn't been homeless for a couple of days. He'd been out and about for a while. Was the impression I got. He was thin, lanky, kind of like looked malnourished, I'd say. Mm-hmm. About 6 feet, but more on the scarecrow side of things.
Okay.
But when he threw out the jacket, he turned around. I'm not a small guy. I'm not the biggest guy, but I'm not a small guy. I'm 5'11", 220, but some of that's tactical fluff.
Indeed. I know I know this feels.
Yeah. So he turns around. He throws off the jacket. He turns around, And without really thinking about it, I took off my glasses and I put them in my pocket. And I'll tell you more about that in a minute. But I took off my glasses, put them in my pocket, and he stands there. And he's yelling at me. I don't really remember why. Probably mind your own business. Da, da, da. He said she stole his lighter. That's what he said. And I said, okay. Well, I don't want any trouble. Man, I can't let you put your hands on her like that. And he's kept going on about the lighter. I was like, well, how about we call the cops and have them come down and straighten this out? I was like, go ahead, call the cops. I said, oh, great idea. Okay, I'll do that. And I said, like, real friendly, like, yeah, that's what we should do.
And make it sound like it's his idea at the same time.
Yeah. So I took up my phone. I called Missy, my wife, Missy. She's a little ways behind me. And the boys are still riding around the park on their bikes, and they're off of my peripheral somewhere. But I go back to her, and I keep him in my peripheral, watching to make sure he doesn't grab her again and make sure he doesn't come my direction. I kept a good distance between us the whole time. And I called and I started talking on 911 to the dispatch person. And then my boys come up on their bikes, and I said, okay, Missy, take the phone, stay on 911 until the police get here, and take the boys over to the playground. There's a playground around the corner, not too far away, but close enough. I said, just take them over there and just stay on the line until the police get here. And I also asked her to give me a couple Subway cards. We carry with us $10 Subway cards for the purpose of blessing people. A cashier looks like they're having a bad day, or a homeless person asking for a handout. We just carry them. So I asked her for 2 cards, and I took the 2 cards. She went around the corner to the playground. I start walking back over. I said, okay, I called the police. They're on the way. And he starts to yell at me again about judging them, about, I don't know them. Don't judge us. I said, and I let him say he had like a rant. I let him say his rant. And I just listened, kept my distance. He got done. I was like, sir, I promise it's not the case. In fact, I have something for both of you. I showed the $10 gift cards in my hands, and there was a bench between us. And while looking at them, I put the cards on the bench, and I stepped back and said, that's 2 $10 cards. After the police get here and you guys get all the stuff straightened out, you guys can go get a bite to eat, okay? And he just deflated. He went from like bowed up and angry to just like, and is like, oh, you're not a jerk.
Right.
And like, that was kind of his vibe. He's like, oh man, I'm sorry. And he got really apologetic, and he started, just like, look, I totally get it. And yeah, it's good you stepped in. I've done that for other guys. I've stepped in to bust some heads when some guys got too rough with the ladies. I never actually hurt her. I'm just upset and stuff. I'm like, you don't owe me an explanation. It's okay. I'll just hang out over here until the cops get here. And we kept talking from a distance. He didn't come. Well, he did come over and got the cards, but there was a bench between us. I just kept that distance. But we just talked until the police showed up, and the police came, and I said, yeah, here they are. Here's what happened. And he said, okay, thanks. And then I went over to the playground with my wife and kids and got my coffee. And that was the end of my involvement in the whole thing.
So you mentioned the glasses was going to come into play later. What was that about?
Okay. So I was thinking about this, especially as I was writing up a story when I sent it off to your team to say, I don't know if the story's worth it or not. And I was like, well, what would make it worth it? I was like, well, what are the lessons I took from it? And one of the things was, I did something by accident. I did something on purpose. And I also have something I would do differently if I had to do over.
Okay.
And the thing I did by accident was I guess it's like Goldilocks aggression. Not too much, not too little.
Mm-hmm.
And when I used the cop voice and told him to step away from the woman, and when he stood up and took off his coat, I took off my glasses because when he stood up and turned around, I thought it was on. And I had this flashback memory to high school of getting punched in the face and having my glasses knocked off. Like when he turned around. So I just took them off for that reason. But I think what I conveyed to him was, if you want to go, I'm ready to go.
Right.
But that wasn't intentional. That was, I didn't even think about taking my glasses off. I just did it. I was like, oh, well, I don't want to get my glasses broke again.
Well, I mean, you could see you met his aggression without escalating things unnecessarily, I think is how I would put that.
Right. But it wasn't like, okay, he threw off his jacket to send me a signal. I'm taking off my glasses and sending him a signal. I wasn't doing that, but that's what was conveyed. So I accidentally, I think, showed him enough aggression to say, I'm not going to cower away and let you beat up this woman.
Right.
And I'm also not going to come in on either. I called him sir. I was respectful. I kept my distance. And after he every time he listened to me, like the second time I spoke up about and told him the second time to get away from her, and he stood up and turned around, I then lowered my tone again. And then when he interrupted me, I went up again, but then he stopped and I lowered my tone again. Like it was like, I'm not escalating, but I'm also not backing off. And so that was the thing I didn't think about at the time. It's just kind of accidental, just enough kind of presence. I don't know. And then the thing I did that was intentional was the Subway gift cards. Like we carry them around for the purpose of blessing people.
Mm-hmm.
I never thought of using it to de-escalate with someone, but I thought, I'll give them cards just to say, I don't hate them. I don't judge them. I don't care. I don't have a dog in the fight of their relationship,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, they're going through something bad. So why not bless them and see if that might just help them to bring you down a level.
Sure.
And it did, it worked. And so that was the thing I did on purpose. And then the thing if I had to do over, I believe in God, and I'm a Christian, and I know you guys let your flag fly.
We do indeed.
Yeah. And so his sovereignty, his providence there that day, keeping me safe, I think I totally believe in. At the same time, there are so many ways it could have gone a different way. He could have come at me with a knife. He could have been hopped up. He could, his lady could have come at me. That I know that happens too, where they could be fighting and then both turn on you. Like there's so many ways I could have gone. And now, since then, I've been carrying for 3 years as a concealed carrier. I just finished my 3rd level Krav Maga belt, and I've been doing that for a couple years now. And I carry with me some sort of tool all the time. I don't always carry my gun, but at least I have pepper spray, and I attribute that straight to active self-protection. I just remember when I started getting into gun stuff, I started looking for resources and stuff, and I started watching John and all his videos on the main channel, and then the side channel of the training and stuff, and I just kept hearing him say, "You need something between a harsh word and a gun."
Mm-hmm.
And as I was watching all these videos that weren't solved with a gun, I thought, yeah. So I took the gun stuff serious. Like I was doing dry fire, I was practicing like crazy, just getting really serious about that. I was like, but I can't, and I don't want to just shoot a guy for yelling at me or bowing up on me. Like I need to have empty-handed skills. I need to have some other options. So palm pepper spray is always in my pocket. Taking Krav Maga, that was very much influenced by this endeavor that sometimes a gunfight can become a fight over a gun,
right?
And wanting to have those empty-handed skills too. So yeah, it's had a big impact on me. So if I had to do over again, I would have had a tool. I'm happy for the de-escalation, but it could have gone horrible. It could have gone better, but it could have gone horrible. And had it gone horrible, I don't know with the skills I had at the time how it would have gone. So that's a few things off the top of my head.
Sure. Did you make contact with the police, or did you just get the heck out of there?
I offered when they pulled up. I kind of told them what's going on. It's like, you want me to hang out or anything? And I think they just sent me on my way. I'm pretty sure they kind of handled it very casually and just, it's like, you guys good? All right, why don't you guys move on? And I think that was the end of it. I don't know, but I did my part and they didn't need anything else from me. So yeah, we just went along with our Saturday.
Yeah, there's a better than average chance that those officers knew these two, had interacted with them before, almost certainly. So let's talk about lessons real quick. I made a couple of notes while we were talking. First of all, it's not the first time Google has given someone bad info as far as give the impression of a place. You read reviews about restaurants on Google or dry cleaners or whatever, and it's really hit and miss. So, I before I bring my family to a place, if I can, I like to kind of scope it out beforehand. So that's something to think about. Not a big deal, but just something to think about. Let's talk about third-party encounters. John tends to recommend you don't get involved in third-party encounters. I think in this case, you were certainly right to be concerned, and I think intervening wasn't necessarily the wrong thing to do. I think if it didn't appear she was about to get seriously hurt, maybe just back off and call the cops. Something to think about. There's no right or wrong answer as far as third-party encounters go, but the fact is you felt compelled. You felt this one was in significant jeopardy. You felt compelled to intervene. Is that correct?
Yeah. because the way he had her by the shoulders and she was pinned against the wall and she looked very much trapped and he was shaking her hard.
Mhm.
Like it, the whole "not my circus, not my monkeys" thing. I would apply that sometimes, but in this case, it's like, no, a man is shaking a woman
Right.
hard, and it might lead to a swing, it might lead to something else, and there wasn't a option to not intervene in that situation.
And the fact is, there's a vibe during these things. You know, we were in Indianapolis recently, and we didn't know what was going. We walked out of a restaurant one night. Me and Steph, Neil, John, some friends of his. John's daughter was there, and there was a vibe in the air going on. And it turns out it was when that whole thing kicked off in Chicago a while back, where a bunch of kids got together like kind of like a flash mob to go down and commit all sorts of mischief and shenanigans in a downtown area. I think that was what was happening. There wasn't anything overt happening, but we were just like, this isn't good. We need to get back to the hotel like right now. Turns out a few minutes later, there was 4 people were shot right about where we were standing. So we weren't wrong. So the fact is, you were there and I wasn't, and our listeners weren't there to kind of get a sense of how serious this was or wasn't. So nobody can really intelligently second guess your particular incident. I only say that to say, if you're finding yourself in this spot, if you're one of our listeners or viewers, you just have to have made the decision in advance that you're willing to use force if necessary, that you're prepared to do that. You have the attitude, skills, and plans to prevail. And is it at a point where I absolutely have to get involved right now, or can I back off and call the police, or is it not my circus, not my monkeys? That's always another thing. Homeless, this isn't an absolute, but it's pretty, like 90% of the time, homeless people fighting is almost always over. Someone took my lighter, someone took my $10, someone took my dope, someone took my $10 Subway gift card, somebody took whatever. I was this is after I retired. Actually, no, just before I retired. Here in Tucson, my wife and I are fueling up at a gas station, and these 2 homeless guys were once chasing another one right across the street from us. And it quickly devolved into basically a curb stomping, at which point I felt compelled to get involved and just get in between them and call the police. Tucson police showed up pretty quickly, so I appreciate that. But that was over, I think it was over $10. And I told the aggressor, I'm like, dude, I'll give you $10 right now. If you just let this go, just move along. I'll give you $10. Not a problem. I'll give you $20. He didn't want my $20. He wanted to exact revenge on the person that he perceived had taken his $10. Who knows what actually happened, but fortunately nobody got too badly hurt. You mentioned this at one point, Roy, about them potentially turning on you, and that is extremely common, whether you're the police or a third party intervening in any kind of a domestic squabble, parent, child, husband, wife, partner, whatever. All of a sudden, it goes from them being mad at each other to you being this interloper, this intervener that it wasn't welcome and wasn't asked for. And now they both turn on you. That is a possibility. And the fact that you consider that means you've given this a little bit of thought, at least, I think. You got the kids away. You said, hey, go around the corner. That was a great idea. Talk to us about what was going through your mind when that happened.
For as long as I remember, like I did mission trips in college and stuff, and I would always just post up in the most strategic places to keep an eye on the rest of the team. Like I was always counting heads of my team and just knowing where everyone was. And it's just some people are hardwired to do that, and I'm one of those guys. So I sensed where my kids were when this was going on. I sensed my distance from the couple. I without. I don't know why I do this, but without really thinking about it, I kept things between us. I kept the bench between us. I kept my eyes on them as I put the cards down. All that stuff is just, I thought, as long as the status quo is maintained, everything's okay. But if he comes this way, or my kids come behind him, then I'll have to notch it up. And I had that in my mind. What notching up would look like at the time, I don't know.
Right.
But it was in the back of my head that could happen. So what was going through my head was really, I know where everyone is right now. As long as that's the case, I feel like I can keep going where we're at. But if that had changed, I would have gotten nervous. But I felt pretty calm. Calm. I felt level. Calm's not the right word. I felt level, like the situation's under control. Mm-hmm. And the whole thing about getting involved, backing up to a moment ago, had they both been standing up, if she was like yelling back, and if she had like an exit out of the situation if she wanted it, I probably would have just like saw it and just kept walking, like watched it out of the corner of my eye. But it was just that whole, she was trapped on the ground underneath him up against a wall. And that's where it's like, there was no question. Do you remember, there was a show, I don't know if it's still on us. It was like called What Would You Do or something like that, where they go through they set these scenarios for people. You ever see that?
No, it doesn't sound familiar, but go ahead. Okay. Tell us about it.
All right. You can cut this if it's not worth it.
No, it's just great.
Well, I just remember this one episode where they set up actors. One was an older man pretending to be a homeless guy, and the other were teenagers, and they were like taunting him and picking on him on the sidewalk, and people were walking by, just mind their own business. And then they did for a while, and no one intervened. And then they put a bat in one of the kids' hands, and people were intervening almost immediately as soon as it started.
Interesting.
And the question that the interviewer had about it, like with some psychologists, was the bat made things more dangerous. It seems like people would be less likely to get involved as soon as that comes into place. And what actually was the fact, what the real takeaway was, no. That's when it became black and white. It was gray when they're just taunting him and teasing him. But when the bat comes into play, this is real, this is black and white, this is wrong. And that's where the bystander, what's it called? That bystander.
The bystander effect.
Bystander effect. That's where it got short circuited. Like this is clearly about to go bad, and that old man can't defend himself. So I think it was one of those situations like it crossed that line of like, nope, there's no gray area here. I have to intervene. And I think a lot of people have that in them. Like, well, I'm not sure. Maybe it's not that. Maybe everything's fine. It crossed that line. So.
Sure. You have to wonder how controlled that experiment was, because there's a real possibility if the guy's being threatened with a bat, that actor gets a gun pointed at him. So hopefully
this was a while ago.
Yeah. Hopefully they had accounted for that. You stole my last question. Darn you, Roy. I was going to mention the bench. The bench is really a critical point. John likes to say, distance buys you time buys you options. That's true. Almost always. So what the bench gives you is a barrier. We have a video that's coming out about a lady who was in the middle of the street, screaming and yelling, ranting and raving, holding a knife. And there's an officer with his gun drawn, trying to keep away from her and get her to drop the knife. Another officer pulls up with his unmarked police car and just pulls in between her and the officer with a gun and keeps moving his car back and forth and around to prevent her from being able to get to him. Now, eventually, spoiler alert, she tries to go around the car, and as she's closing on this officer, who's probably got a quarter pound of pressure on the trigger at this point, this cop just boops her with the patrol car, just like 2-3 miles an hour, boink, and knocks her over, and they were able to get her into custody. One of the officers was injured, but a barrier is really a critical thing. It's kind of like, it's not like cover where you're covering from gunfire, but a barrier will buy you a moment. If he was going to get to you, he needed an extra 3/4 of a second to a second to get over the bench or around it. And that gives you time to think about what you're going to do next. So I think the bench was great. Roy, before we part ways, is there anything else you wanted to mention? I don't want to leave anything out.
Yeah. Could I make a plug for my Krav Maga school?
Sure. Absolutely.
Okay. So if you're in the Colorado Springs area, Peak Krav Maga, with Doug Erickson, it's a great school. It's a hole in the wall, but Doug is amazing. He's former cop. Really knows his stuff. Teaches really pragmatic stuff. I've gotten so much out of the class. My kids go to his kids class. I go 3 nights a week, and I just absolutely love it. And it's given me a lot more tools for situations. Should I ever find myself in another situation like this or worse, to go in with more than just confidence,
right,
but actually have some tools in the tool belt, so to speak. So Pete Krav Maga in Colorado Springs.
Yeah, I'll allow that only because you seem sensible. Like you wouldn't, like if it was some nonsense training, you would have figured that out and wouldn't be recommending him. So yeah, if you're in that area, check that guy out. Roy Moore, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here, Mike.
Alrighty, gang. Welcome back once again to the Gutowski Files. Featuring, no, I'm kidding, he's starring Stephen Gutowski. Stephen is the founder of TheReload.com and the host of the Weekly Reload podcast. Speaking of which, our topic this week is fill in the Buzz Lightyear meme, red flags everywhere. We're going to talk a lot about red flags. So tell us who was on your show this week, as you did discuss some red flag issues with that guest. Who was it this week on the Reload podcast?
Yes, we had Cam Edwards from Bearing Arms, another fantastic gun writer out there, somebody who follows very closely the gun politics of our times here. So he's one of the more respected pro-gun writers out there, in my opinion, and one of the more knowledgeable ones. So we had him on and we talked a lot about the Tennessee proposal, which I think is part of what we're going to talk about here on this segment of the show today.
Yeah, in fact, let's get right into it. There's a couple of articles over at the Reload. Still working on this video thing, folks. I got to look down to look at my monitor, so don't think I'm being rude. I don't know what I'm doing.
I forgot we were doing video again. So first I was looking over here, and it was right before we started. I was like, oh, yeah.
So
this is video.
So for our listeners, you read the Your Mom Reads the Free Beacon t-shirt. Thanks a lot. I appreciate that, knowing that would be on.
And so do I. That's where I used to work for anyone.
We are professionals, folks. Trust us. We know what we're doing. So there's an article by Jake Fogelman over at the Reload entitled Minnesota Passes a Red Flag Law, Universal Background Checks. There's another piece over there by Stephen Gutowski about the podcast, examining Tennessee's red flag proposal and Trump's bump stock defense with Cam Edwards, as we said earlier. So talk to us first, if you would, about Minnesota and what exactly is in that law that they passed and why we should care, why it's news to us.
Yeah, so Minnesota has actually now passed a public safety omnibus bill that has several gun provisions in it. One of them is a universal background check law that requires background checks on private sales, sales to individuals, between individuals. So you'd have to go to a gun dealer in order to make a sale or go to your local police station and get a special permit. And then the other aspect is their red flag law, which is a more traditional red flag law, one that is similar to many of the others that have passed throughout the country, especially in blue states. Minnesota is now a triple blue state where Democrats have total control of government, similar to Michigan. They both flipped in the 2022 elections when Republicans did very poorly. And so this is the result of that. Both those states have now passed red flag laws, universal background checks. And there's a typical red flag law. It temporarily confiscates firearms from anyone who is subject to an order. The orders can be filed by a range of people, from police to mental health professionals to relatives, and they can be ordered after an ex parte hearing, which means that the person who is accused of being a threat to themselves or others isn't actually informed of the hearing beforehand, and the order is issued before they are even aware that there's a proceeding happening. And then later on down the line, they're able to challenge it in court. And so these are some of the significant problems or critiques that a lot of pro-gun advocates have with these kinds of laws, the red flag laws. This one does, however, have a provision for punishing those who have falsely filed for a red flag order. So there's a slight difference in that regard.
So do you happen to know, and we haven't talked about this beforehand, do you happen to know off the top of your head, has there been recorded, documented events where people have falsely claimed, hey, someone made threats or did something, completely loony, and that was followed up by law enforcement?
Yes. So there's actually, now I'm not saying this is a common thing, but it has certainly happened. There was even a case in Colorado where a mother filed a red flag order against a police officer who had shot her son in an altercation, basically filed a false report claiming that he was a threat to himself and others because of the officer-involved shooting that had happened. So it does happen. I don't know that it is the majority or anything close to that. I don't know that there's much research either on sort of false filings. A lot of states don't have any sort of repercussions if you file for one of these petitions and it's denied. And also they tend to be accepted. The vast majority of red flag orders that get filed are actually put into effect. So
what do you know? Tell us what the big difference is between the Minnesota and the proposed one in Tennessee, and then let's talk about New Jersey a little bit too.
Yeah, there's a number of significant differences with the Tennessee proposal that's been put out there by Governor Bill Lee, who's a Republican. Tennessee is obviously a state where you have full Republican control of the legislature as well. So just in that regard, it's interesting politically because yes, Minnesota and Michigan passed red flag laws, but those are both now triple blue states. And that's where you see most of these sorts of laws going into effect. Really, the big exception is Florida after Parkland passed one, The Republican legislature there was responsible for passing that bill, but most of the rest of these are in deep blue states. So Tennessee looking into doing something like this, and in fact, the governor has called a special session to discuss this proposal. It doesn't happen until August 21st, but it's a significant move. The legislature's out of session now, but they're going to be coming back for this at the end of the summer, essentially. And yeah, there are a number of differences between this red flag proposal. In fact, the governor doesn't even want to call it a red flag proposal because he thinks that term is politically charged, and because this proposal expands something that Tennessee already has in regards to domestic violence incidents, where if somebody is accused of domestic violence, they can be subject to an order of protection where they'd have to temporarily give up their guns to the police or to a third party who can legally own guns. And so this proposal sort of expands on that to include people who are considered a threat to themselves or others. But it's pretty similar to a red flag law in that it still takes guns away from someone temporarily. However, there are a number of due process protections, or some of these issues I mentioned earlier with Minnesota's law or these other red flag laws. Bill Lee is actually trying to address some of those things.
So I guess there's a balance that needs to be struck. And this is why it's too bad that our laws are made by professional politicians, in my opinion. Like there's a lot of things that really require the knowledge of experts. We hope they're consulting with knowledgeable people who are fair and sort of down the middle, but I don't know that they are. I guess go ahead.
No, sorry. I just wanted to say, like, so the main differences of these protections that they put in deal with those ex parte hearings. So that the hearing where a judge can order your guns taken from you, even if you're not aware of the proceeding, that's not possible under this Tennessee proposal. Most states don't provide you with any lawyer if you can't afford one. So that's another change in the Tennessee proposal, is that you have access to a public defender if you need one, even though this is a civil proceeding. And then additionally, they have mental health screenings. So if somebody is subject to or the petition gets filed against somebody, a mental health professional has to actually evaluate them before an order can be given to take their firearms away. And then in addition to that screening, if the petition goes through and is successful and the person's guns get taken away, they also have to actually attend mental health treatment as well, in addition to having their firearms taken away. And so these are the attempts they've made to kind of differentiate from these other red flag laws that exist and, make this more palatable to gun owners. Whether or not that list of reforms there is enough remains to be seen, obviously. And Cam on our podcast, over the weekly Reload podcast, gave a number of reasons why he's not convinced. But it's certainly at the very least an interesting thing to watch and see how these develop out. Yeah,
certainly. I think what I was trying to say, perhaps inartfully earlier, was that there has to be a balance struck, because on the one hand, you don't want people's Second Amendment rights infringed unnecessarily. You don't want there to be secret proceedings going on where the person in question isn't even aware of them. That sets a dangerous precedent, I think. And then on the other hand, I've been in a position where there was a person, in my orbit who might want to come do me harm. And I know how that feels. It feels terrible. So I think for those of us on the sort of Second Amendment side of things and pro 2A, I think sometimes we need to temper our language a little bit, maybe about the sort of hard line shall not be infringed. I understand that, and I agree with that. But if you're a single mom, with a couple of kids, and the ex-boyfriend is making threats, that's a real world thing that you have to deal with. You can't, your ethereal high-mindedness about other things doesn't help that person in that situation. Not that the red flag order would. The thing is, like anything else, not editorializing now, I like to announce when I'm editorializing. The thing is, nothing's probably going to stop that person. The bottom line is they'll wait till you walk out front and run you over if they have to. So I'm not sure in the grand scheme of things, certainly taking their gun away would make them a little less dangerous, but I'm not convinced. But that aside, let's talk about real quick. There's a development in New Jersey. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so we got a preliminary injunction issued against New Jersey's Bruin response law. We've talked about this in the show before, right? The Supreme Court handed down their New York State Pistol and Rifle Association v. Bruin decision last year that struck down a number of these deep blue states' concealed carry permitting laws, where you could effectively you could pass the background check, you could go through all the training that's required, and then they could still deny you a permit. It's called may issue permitting, where they didn't have to give you the permit just because you actually complete the requirements.
Mm-hmm.
And so in response to that, a number of states, well, really just 2 states at this point, New Jersey and New York, have passed laws to try and restrict gun carry in numerous ways after that big ruling was handed down. And so now a federal judge has blocked most of those reforms in New Jersey. So most of these sort of sensitive places, or otherwise known as gun-free zones, that New Jersey created in their legislation after Bruin have now been blocked. So that's a pretty significant ruling. The judge did uphold some of the permitting requirements that New Jersey instituted. So some of the fee structures and the permit to purchase law that they have, a number of these requirements were upheld. Essentially, as long as they're in good faith and they aren't used to try and block people from obtaining the permits altogether. The judge ruled that the requirements are constitutional, that they're in line with the history and tradition of firearms regulation in the United States as required under Bruin. So it's still a significant victory for gun rights advocates who are challenging these Bruin response laws, and a significant loss for not only New Jersey, but likely New York and California, who's also considering passing one of these types of laws.
Folks, you know what I'm about to say. If you're lamenting the lack of down-the-middle, sane, sober reporting on the Second Amendment and all things gun-related, do me a favor, go over to thereload.com, thereload.com. There is a link in the description of this podcast to thereload.com. Consider getting a membership. Stephen relies on your membership fees, dues to continue his important work. So go over there and give him a look. Stephen, once again, as always, have a wonderful week, and you have the last word.
Absolutely.